If you're here for BBC World News America, never fear. Your program will show tonight in its entirety at 7:30 p.m. In the meantime, this is Headline Humboldt. Stay with us tonight as we interview Sean Mitchell from the Timber Heritage Association about the importance of history and learning from our past. Then we'll hear an important update from the state on the Great Redwood Trail, a project planned along old rail lines that could prove economically pivotal. Coming up next. This is Headline Humboldt. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. Ours is a community rich with history, as preserved by the scores of Victorian houses, numerous museums, tribal tradition, and family lore. Society has undergone massive transformations during our collective stay here, from responsible tribal hands to an often rapacious frontier culture, then through the smog-laden industrial revolution and on to the modern age. Now we've transcended almost all the hardware and come right on through to the much vaunted information age. But each of these eras represents something about our collective experience here on the ragged northwestern edge of the continent and in the wider world. How we've survived, how we've thrived, tells us all a tale about what it means to be human and to struggle. In the not-so-distant future, students will learn about the great pandemic of 2020, and these kids will look back and wonder how they'd have reacted in the exact same circumstance, when people all over the world were dying and the disease seemed unstoppable. They'll learn that Humboldt County was certainly hit by the disease, but that our local public health was up to the task and did a competent job of keeping us alive and mostly in good health. They'll also learn about Donald Trump and the storming of the Capitol, Black Lives Matter, and George Floyd. They'll learn about how we've handled the challenge of history and whether we acted with fear or with love when the pivotal moments came. One of the most interesting aspects of history to me is how the actors involved rarely consider that they are leaving a narrative legacy for posterity. They lived, they struggled, and they died. But for subsequent generations, their tales of woe become a sort of map for understanding the human character, what we're made of, and how we're built. Tonight for the interview, we're sitting down with Vice President Sean Mitchell from the Timber Heritage Association to talk about their work to preserve the tools of history and illustrate for the rest of us how our predecessors lived in a time of limitless possibilities. By looking back and preserving those places and things that made their society work, we get a chance to learn just a little more about ourselves and the rather precarious project of being a human in the here and now. And so, the interview. Vice President Sean Mitchell from the Timber Heritage Association, welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
No problem. So, you guys are in the business of preserving basically the North Coast legacy in a lot of ways. Can we just start with the general question of what is the association and what would you say is its mission?
Sure. So back in 1977, some people actually got the idea that they should start saving some artifacts, specifically the Bear Harbor locomotive and the Falk locomotive. If you've been to Fort Humboldt, you might have actually seen those steaming up. We actually rebuilt those, and the organization evolved into Timber Heritage Association 2004, and we've essentially been trying to build a timber and railroad museum in Samoa out at the historic Samoa shops, and we're really trying to actually have a museum out there and also an operational excursion train from Samoa to Eureka.
Yeah. So, I'm intrigued by the idea that you guys rebuilt those. Where did you guys get the expertise to work on these trains that were probably, 100 years old at the time?
Yeah, so 1884 and 1892 to be specific. And at that time, there were some people that were still around that, worked on steam locomotives. And nowadays, that's becoming much less a thing for sure. And there's actually the Bear right there and the Falk. So those guys actually really worked hard to go through and just disassemble and put every single piece back together. And they really had to look at, old schematics and diagrams and all that type of stuff. And really, it's an oral history of being able to talk to people that actually worked on those things back when they were operational and really spreading this information to now.
Yeah, I bet there's quite the satisfaction for people who haven't probably talked about that work in scores of years who are able to hand off a little bit of that knowledge.
Right, yeah. Boiler making is a really interesting art, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So, you guys focus on timber and rail, those types of work could often be grueling and dangerous. How do you think the people then, had the guts and the grit to sort of handle it? Do you think that people today would have that same ability if it came down to it?
You know, we think about that all the time when we look in these buildings. We look at some of the ways that they used to do things. Like we look at the old wiring and things like that, and just the size of the timbers out at our shops, for instance. It was extremely dangerous, dirty work, and those people worked incredibly long hours. In a lot of cases, you know, they didn't have the benefit of unions or anything like that, and it was a really difficult job to have. You know, the guys that were actually working in the forest, and then also the guys that were and people that were working in the railroad shops and actually operating the trains. It was very, very dangerous work.
Yeah. Now, real quick, the Falk engine, that worked out of the town of Falk, right? Which is out toward on Elk River Road. You can take the...
It did, yeah. And it was built by a company called Marschutz and Cantrell, as well as the Bear Harbor. And they both have this type of logging winch at the front. It's kind of like a rolling steam donkey, actually. And from what we understand, they're the last two of those type of locomotives in existence with steam winches in the front, and they're the last two Marschutz and Cantrell locomotives in the world, and we operate both of them.
That's pretty amazing.
I was inside of the boiler actually power brushing some of the scale off the inside of it, and it is dirty, brutal work. There it is steaming right there.
Yeah, wow. You know, as you teach auto mechanics at Eureka High, is that right?
Yeah, and U.S. history.
Okay.
Correct.
Now, that's almost a perfect fit for what you're doing with the association, right? I mean, you couple the history with the auto mechanics. Fascinating. Yeah. What do you appreciate about the mechanics of it all? I mean, do you get a sense of sort of the evolution of engineering from working on the steam power technology and then also working on cars? Do you think you've got a... Go ahead.
Absolutely. I think about the different companies that built these locomotives. Like I mentioned, Marschutz and Cantrell. We also have Baldwin. We have about 3 or 4 Baldwin locomotives. We also have a couple Lima locomotives. These are incredibly massive machines. Big George, the Hammond number 15, which actually sat at Sequoia Park for so long. We have that locomotive.
I've climbed that machine. I was a kid.
There you go. Yeah. So we saved it from getting scrapped, and that's the big thing. Is we think that people should get to see these artifacts.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm just fascinated by the mechanics of it. You know, the way that boilers work, the way that superheated steam can, you know, produce so much power. I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think other people do too, which is why we really want to save these locomotives and hopefully get to actually show them off for people around the bay.
Yeah, you know, one thing that often occurs to me when I, you know, view the artifacts like this or go to a museum where I see these sorts of things, that the idea that somehow we're more sophisticated now just isn't true. I mean, they had different tools, they worked in a different sort of environment, but they were just as intelligent and crafty as we are today, if not more so in a lot of ways.
You know, if I could just say one thing I think is so fascinating is that, you know, if you look at 1920, the Northwestern Pacific Railroad, which ran here between, you know, Marin County and Eureka, it was operational. You could hop on a ferry from San Francisco, go to Tiburon, ride a 600-volt electric interurban railway, and then hop on a train and go all the way to Eureka, Blue Lake, Trinidad even. And a lot of people don't realize that. We think that we've figured out mass transit, but we had it down in the 1920s. It's just the rise of the automobile that actually killed a lot of the rail transit in this country.
Yeah, we've gone there, and now we're trying to come back.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
right.
pretty difficult. So, I mean, obviously you have these treasures. Where can people see them? You mentioned that tomorrow there's going to be a big event?
Yeah, so for the first time in a year and a half because of the pandemic, we are actually going to be running the AMR number 60. That's the speeder, the crew car. It's that little orange machine that we take out on the rails, and we'll be hauling the yellow car behind it. Yeah. And we're going to be running from basically Halverson Park over there, kind of near T Street in Eureka, and we're going almost 2.5 miles. We're going to go past Target, go over the Eureka Slough Bridge, and then go all the way to basically the mill across from Harper Motors.
Wow.
It's almost 5 miles round trip. People get to experience the railroad, and it's a small snippet of what we hope will be a real excursion train one day.
Yeah.
And I think people would love it.
Yeah, no, so you had told me it was $8 for adults and $7 for seniors and $4 for kids age 3 to 10. Those under 2 ride for free. Just wanted to get that in there for folks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Now you mentioned that you know, you guys want to preserve basically an excursion train around Humboldt Bay, and we were talking about, and we're going to talk more about the Great Redwood Trail project. But you guys are kind of hoping to work in tandem with that, right?
Yeah, you know, we actually went out with Humboldt County with the, you know, to basically the public works, and went out there and we tested these flange fillers because it's like a compressible rubber strip so that we can have rail on the slough bridge in conjunction with the trail. THA is 100% with the trails. We want to have rails with trails between Samoa and Eureka. And then we understand that the Great Redwood Trail might happen between, Eureka and Willits, and we have no intention, obviously, of going to Willits. We want to have an awesome excursion train that works with the trail between Samoa and Eureka, because we think it would be awesome for the community. Both, I ride bikes and I love going on trails, but we also think that, we can have an excursion train to work with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, how do you guys collect the stuff that you get? I mean, obviously, the railroad or the motors or the engines, excuse me.
Locomotives.
The locomotives aren't just sitting in someone's backyard, right? I mean, like, how do you get them? How do you collect them when someone gives it to you? If it's away?
Yes. A lot of different ways. One example, the Arcata and Mad River number 7, a Shea locomotive, it was actually supposed to be put on display at Shea Park in Arcata, and ended up getting, went through a fire and then ended up getting donated to us directly. Actually, I think we purchased it for $1 or something like that. And we have been stewards of all these locomotives and artifacts that a lot of them have been donated, and in many cases, they were at risk of being scrapped. Wow. And we think if something can be saved and put into a museum and especially rehabilitated to operate so that people, 20 years in the future that never lived during the steam era, which pretty much ended in the 50s to 60s, we think it'd be so cool for people to get to continue to see these, incredible machines, which really are breathing, living machines when they're actually operating.
Yeah. Now, one of the sort of a weird exception, but colorful nonetheless, to you guys' collection is the Netflix mobile, right? You guys
the trolley.
The trolley. Now, this had a cameo in a series of unfortunate events on Netflix. Is that right?
It was actually built for that.
Wow.
So there it is in the production. And the Eureka Lodging Alliance wanted to actually have something that we could run down in Old Town Eureka, and there it is on the rails. We had to go to Canada to actually acquire it from the production facility there.
Wow.
It was in the Netflix production of a series of unfortunate events. The most recent one with Neil Patrick Harris, and they actually some of our volunteers, they went up in a literal snowstorm and brought this thing back from Canada. They got a flat tire at one point, and bring it back into the country. They're like, what is this thing? Is it a trolley? What, we don't know what it is. And so we ended up getting it back here, and for the last almost 3 years we've been repowering it. So it has a little gasoline engine that runs a hydraulic system, and we completely engineered it in-house.
Did you have something to do with that, or?
Yeah, I was there. I didn't do a lot of the hands-on work because I've been teaching in the pandemic.
Yeah,
so,
of course. Yeah, no.
Yeah, my time to shine with THA out on the rails and do all that stuff is definitely the summertime. But some of our volunteers, they put literally thousands of hours into doing this type of stuff, and that is just a shining example of what is possible when you get some of these people that work really hard on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and and Arch Alive nights, that's when people can come out and take a look at this thing, right?
Yeah, it's actually going to be running for the Friday night market every single Friday in August.
Okay,
so
great.
People will get to see it. Yeah, and I think we're going to set it down on the rails adjacent to the speeder tomorrow in Eureka, and it'll be running the opposite direction, so people will get to see it there also.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool little thing. It's a goofy little trolley, but we love it because Eureka did actually have a full trolley system.
Yeah,
Talk again
absolutely.
about mass transit.
Yeah.
And the citizens of Eureka said, nope, we're done with trolleys. We're gonna do buses, and they literally burned every trolley.
Oh my gosh.
As like a public, like a effigy. They just completely burned them. So we think it's cool to have a little bit of a nod to that history, even if it's not historic locally.
Yeah, you mentioned that oftentimes you're saving these locomotives from the scrap heap. I mean, the percentage of gear that was around that has been scrapped has got to be, 99%, right, or even more.
You take a look at the numbers, the locomotive numbers. So, for instance, we have the Pacific Lumber Company number 29. We have the 37, and the 35 exists also.
Yeah. I see
all the other locomotives, they're gone. They've been scrapped.
Wow. So there was a locomotive for every number, and that it wasn't just randomly assigned. It has significance.
Absolutely. Yeah, and a lot of times they had specific classes. So like a certain number class, like Union Pacific just rebuilt the Big Boy locomotive, which is a 4000 class. And that's one of the things, with that project, it's the largest operating steam locomotive in the world. There's really a renaissance of people that really want to get out and see these type of heritage railroads. And we think it would be absolutely massive for our local tourism. I love the idea of getting to, roll into Old Town Eureka on a historic passenger train. And think of all the businesses that are along the line, like, Redwood Curtain, there's Dick Taylor Chocolates downtown. There's so many different companies that I think would want to get in on it.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds like kind of the thing that the attraction maybe that we've been missing for all this time. We have a minute left. I just wanted to get it in there for people who, if they want to support your organization, is there a website they can go to find out about the group and also figure out a way to contribute?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is timberheritage.org. And also we have a Facebook page that's facebook.com/timberheritage. We're really easy to find. And we have links on PayPal to donate, all that kind of stuff. And we have an Instagram also. We're constantly updating people with our new schedules and new projects we're doing, and we're just really hopeful for the future. So
absolutely. Yeah. And thank you so much for being here. Fascinating discussion. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. We'll be right back after a short break.
Would you be willing to just take PGT off the horse, keep the horse?
Comedian C.J. Hunt talks to people for and against the removal of monuments in New Orleans.
Can't scream Black Lives Matter if you live in a city where everything around you is telling you they don't.
Feel like we got the majority of New Orleanians behind us.
Myth and fact collide in a battle over Southern identity.
It's not subtle.
The neutral ground.
Today, Humboldt County Public Health reported 26 new cases of COVID-19, the largest single-day total since May 14th. While the percentage of local residents with at least one shot stands at slightly more than 65%, that's one vaccination shot, health officials are concerned that our numbers still linger below the overall state average, just as we're about to seriously encounter the new and more virulent Delta strain of COVID-19. It's happening all over the country. They point out again that the Delta strain seems to be primarily infecting the unvaccinated population. The answer, it seems obvious, is for everyone to quit procrastinating and get their vaccinations as soon as possible. To that end, a clinic will be held tomorrow, Saturday, from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Arcata Farmers Market on the Arcata Plaza. Another clinic is scheduled for Sunday from noon to 1:30 at the Blue Lake Resource Center, that's 111 Greenwood Avenue. And another Sunday clinic will be held at the Arcata United Methodist Church at 1761 11th Street. All three of these events will offer both Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson vaccines. During a recent hearing before the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, North Coast Congressman Jared Huffman spoke passionately about the issue of climate change, and he challenged his Republican colleagues to engage more seriously on the issue.
It is so appropriate that we are taking up this subject of decarbonizing the transportation sector in a week when the INVEST Act is on the floor of the House of Representatives. We know how hugely important the transportation sector is for our interconnected lives, our jobs, and commerce, but it's also number one when it comes to greenhouse gas pollution. So we have to tackle this part of the climate crisis, and we've got to transform this sector from something dependent almost entirely on fossil fuels to something that is a lot cleaner and more resilient, and I think we're having an important part of that conversation here today. We know that we're going to need to be very aggressive on fuel efficiency, zero-emission vehicles, reducing vehicle miles traveled. These aren't just priorities from Democrats. We're seeing industry already leading the way in moving in this direction with exciting announcements from General Motors and Ford, among many, many others. Zero-emission vehicles make sense from a business case. It is where the industry is heading, and I can tell you as an EV driver, it's just a better way to get around, too. So I'm excited about it, but I'm confused, frankly, about Mr. Bryce's testimony. On a week when we've got 120-degree weather in the Pacific Northwest, I was hoping that we would begin to hear some solutions from our friends across the aisle that match the scale the crisis that's just increasingly obvious. What we continue to hear, unfortunately, are just things that they're against. And Mr. Bryce brought up a whole bunch of creative reasons, really loaded up a lot of creative arguments against electric vehicles. I found it really confusing then when in his testimony he said, but notwithstanding all these terrible things about EVs, if we could just power everything with nuclear, he'd be for them. That is some cognitive dissonance. But I just want to announce, or I just want to invite our friends across the aisle that at some point, instead of just vilifying Green New Deals and proposals to electrify vehicles, we got to get you in the game of coming up with solutions that match the scale of this crisis. We really have to change that conversation. But Mr. Van Amberg, since Mr. Bryce did bring up this specter of electric vehicles causing the California grid to collapse, I'm going to just start there with you and invite you to, well, this is my time, Mr. Bryce. And I'm going to ask Mr. Van Amberg to respond to what you said in your testimony, if you'll allow me to do that. So, Mr. Van Amberg, are we going to put an excessive strain on the grid? Can the grid handle this move toward electrification that we're seeing on transportation in California?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you, Representative Huffman. It's always worth our looking and taking a deep look at this. From the point of view of the transmission grid, there really is no issue with having sufficient electricity, even to start putting the big rig trucks onto the grid as that starts to happen. The utility sector does need to really grow out. And this is part of something that I think we can all agree on, is modernizing our grid. And the distribution grid is in great need of further beefing up. Because even as we put in new load for buildings and businesses and the like, the utilities often don't have enough power in their distribution grid. Plenty of power at the transmission side, not enough at distribution. And we need modernization for a variety of things. We're concerned about cybersecurity, much less, Carrington level events. So I think, we're all, I think, can agree on that. But no, the grid is not going to suffer some cataclysm from transportation. In fact, one of the beauties, I think, that we're seeing is that a lot of, say, bus depots, as they're starting to put in, say, 50 to 100 electric buses on a site, are starting to put in backup power that can actually add resiliency to the grid. It's distributed energy resources and backup power.
I was going to ask you about
Ford
that.
F-150.
Yes, the Ford F-150 video showed a truck that was powering a home and pushing power in the opposite way onto the grid. I was going to ask you, is there a scenario in the future where EVs plugged into the grid actually become something that fortifies the grid?
Absolutely. We're already seeing it with school buses as they're parked during the day and charging. They actually become a backup power source. Some vehicles have been used in disasters actually to power forward the relief crews. So yes, we're already seeing this. And we basically, when they're plugged in, they become backup power assets to the grid and adding resiliency to it.
The California State Legislature has allocated $16.5 million in its upcoming budget toward the Great Redwood Trail. You heard us mention it in the interview. It's a hiking trail along the 300-mile abandoned rail line between San Rafael and Humboldt County. The effort has long been a passion project for State Senator Mike McGuire, and according to some, could provide the North Coast with a major attraction for eco-tourists. McGuire late last week reported that $10 million of the total allocation will be spent to develop a master plan for the conversion of the line. The plan will ultimately analyze the costs of physically converting the right-of-way to meet transportation needs along various segments of the trail and of maintaining those lines, in addition to funding outreach to landowners along the trail. The remainder of the budgeted money will be used to fund the legal process of rail banking with the Federal Surface Transportation Board and to improve railroad operations on the very southern end of the line. This really is the transformational day that we've been talking about for years on end, McGuire said, to be able to create the trail network that will connect two parts of the state, from the sparkling waters of Humboldt Bay to the busy bay waters in San Francisco. Tonight's community conversation, produced by the City of Eureka, focuses on Pali Yoga, a business operated by Ben and Rupali Brown.
I'm Rupali Brown.
And I'm Ben Brown.
And we are owners of Pali Yoga.
Pali Yoga is our own little family style yoga studio. We started it together about 4 years ago, and We love what we do. We get people in here in little small communities and we practice together. We move our bodies, we practice meditation, we practice mindful movement, and together we do our best to feel good in this life.
We do teach a bar class. We have yoga sculpt, which is yoga with weights, and we have a fitness instructor who just started teaching here. So she teaches mindful fitness also. So it's all forms, small weights. We have a teacher that plays the gongs. So we have that yin and gongs and restorative yoga. So just everything that we can offer people in terms of movement.
We're located at 117 F Street, right down here in Old Town, right across from the Fountain Plaza. And we started this studio together, what, 4 years ago?
4 years ago.
4 years ago, yeah.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of support from local community members and other business owners. Our friend across the street who owns Cafe Waterfront has practiced with us for many years.
We meet business owners all the time that say, oh, we've been to Pali Yoga, and it's been great because our students then go to cafes here and we do our, they come shop here, and it just all becomes like a combined community of businesses that help each other out.
We love the idea that our yoga students come out of our yoga studio feeling really good and then walking out into this beautiful Old Town Eureka and sharing that bliss, sharing that really good vibes that a yoga practice can bring. I love Eureka. I grew up in Humboldt County.
Eureka too.
I grew up in a small town down the coast from here, and moving to Eureka as an adult, it was like, I couldn't believe how beautiful it really was. And this downtown area, this Old Town area in particular, is exceptional. I mean, the number of high quality, beautiful old Victorian homes that kind of set the landscape that you live in, and then this Humboldt Bay that is really a treasure.
Yeah, and all the fabulous new things that Eureka is doing with the young people taking over and doing the street art festival and like the night market, and it's all been really fantastic. We love Eureka. We love living here.
There's an activity, there's a feeling of activity level in Eureka right now that feels like, and the pandemic was hard, don't get me wrong. The pandemic was hard, but in the years preceding the pandemic, and right now we're all kind of starting to flex back into trying to make this little city thrive. And there's something really nice to be in a city that feels like it's growing, that feels like it's got a lot of potential that hasn't fully been realized yet. And that's true. And it really feels that way. And it feels like if we all play our cards right, the city could become really an awesome, awesome
because
little place to live.
It is beautiful.
And it is now, but like I said, there's something beautiful about this feeling that there is even more potential for growth.
I agree with that last statement. Stay tuned, stay informed.